Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast. This week, I'm chatting to filmmaker Bruce Fontaine. Hi, Bruce, how are you?
Fine, thank you. How about yourself?
Very good, thank you. Very good. So, to set this up, I should say, a little while back, I made a YouTube video about how to make money on Tubi. At the very end of that video, I said, if you're a filmmaker and you've got a poster, send me a poster. I'd love to critique it, not in a is it good or bad, but just look at it in terms of is it the sort of thing that would do well on Tubi? You were one of the filmmakers who generously sent me your poster, and I did the video, so the video's up, you can take a look at it, but I did not know who I was dealing with when I was looking at that poster. Now, having now Googled you and gone through your very long IMDb and very impressive credits with all the fight choreography stuff you've done, so which we will dig into. But let's start with Beyond Redemption, which is the original, I think your directorial debut, the original poster you sent me, which came out in 2015, I believe. So if you were speaking to somebody now, because I know a lot of micro-budget filmmakers do start with an action film, I've spoken to several, what are your kind of tips for somebody doing action on a very, very low budget?
I call it, and even with my more recent film, I call it reverse engineering. Don't write a story with no thought to the cost, with no thought to locations, no thought to cast. I just want to make this brilliant story. Usually I find, because I've read a lot of scripts of other people, and usually I'll find they just kind of had no clue how much some things cost. In fact, I've got a writer that I collaborate with. He started writing club scenes, giant club scene. There's, 500 people dancing in the club, and then they're going to start smashing things they're going to smash the DJ booth. And I'm like, do you know how much that's going to cost? You know how much it is to fill a club? So yeah, I'd say reverse engineer. And that's primarily looking at your assets that you have, or you might possibly be able to get. And I always tell people, cast, location, crew, those are the big things, right? Don't think of really cool camera moves, because you're probably going to be using really basic stuff if you're in a micro budget category. We actually had a couple on Beyond Redemption, kind of PVC tubes for a dolly track. No professional dolly track. We literally had just engineered ones and stuck it on sticks and that sort of thing. We eventually at one point, a film supply guy knew what we were doing. He said, all right, I'll help you out. We got a jib for a day, right? Mm. But I'm saying you don't want to try to get stuff that is too expensive. Think of, what do I have? If it's a location and you've got full access, and make sure you're insured, don't damage anything. Make it about just that location. If you can get 2 or 3 locations, then think about how you can utilize them. How can you make a story fit that? And then, of course, cast, right? A lot of people, and in fact, I had a few people say, why don't you get an actor instead of a stunt guy? I'm like, well, look, this is going to sell on action. No disrespect to an actor who knows their craft and they're very good at it. If they don't know how to do the things that, say, Brian Ho can do, which is kind of like a Donnie Yen type level, they're not going to be able to learn that on the day. Sometimes, especially if you don't know what you're doing, doubling people isn't always effective. So if you're doing an action film, maybe try to find stunt guys, or, depending on your city, because maybe not every city has stunt people, martial artists, right? If they're not trained as stunt people or film people, be prepared that they and maybe the filmmaker will have to go through some learning curve stuff. But I'd say is reverse engineering, finding the resources. If you got some really good stunt actor types and you want to make an action movie, those are your guys. Don't get some guy who's really solid actor, Shakespearean, but he can't even punch. He's just, pawn in the air. Yeah. And then try to get a good idea of how to work out a budget. You should try to cost stuff out before you go to camera and get a realistic idea, and actually take the time to find out how much that cameraman, because usually they go in a package, how much it actually costs. Because a lot of people have unrealistic ideas. I'm frequently getting young people going, well, I want to do this and this. I'm like, too expensive. You can't do that.
Yeah, definitely. Agree with all of that. And I think, because I did my first solo film was a sort of vampire-y martial arts thing. We had a martial arts person doing all the choreography.
Hmm.
What I think I didn't anticipate, and it's the same with horror in a way, is that action can actually take a really long time to film because
Hmm.
you've got, especially if you're fast cutting within that action and you want to cover it all, and it's over in a heartbeat. You're better off in a way doing a scene of two people sat at a table having a conversation. That's a lot easier to shoot. When you do an action scene, it's going to take a long time. It will be fun, but yeah, I completely underestimated how long those sequences take to shoot, and also keeping that energy going within that fight, and figuring out the sort of spaces within it so that it's also got its own little story arc to it. Um, so having worked on all those Hong Kong movies with all those directors, what are some of the things that the really good directors do when they're making action films? Do you think what are kind of the things they put into practice?
Okay, so now when I worked in Hong Kong, it was some years back, and some things have changed,
Mm.
but they're very different, especially back at that time in terms of how they shoot action. Um, I worked in about 30 feature films in Hong Kong. Like I said, when I worked for Jackie Chan, it was a film called Operation Condor. He actually used to edit off set while we were shooting, and because he knew myself and a few other guys were really keen, he would actually take us to the trailer and he kind of give us lessons, saying, "Well, I did this because of this, and I did this because of that. I picked this angle because I think it looks better and it'll cut well." Um, but they do what we used to call edit in the head, and the films, when they shoot their action scenes, they will often shoot in little pieces. In fact, I always tell people here, when it comes to, say, a fight scene, I never once, not once, learned a fight scene in its entirety before filming. I learned the piece that they were going to shoot, and they say, "All right, we're going to be kind of cowboy frame. I want you to punch, 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 do this, and maybe lift up your leg, do a kick, and we're going to cut. We're going to go low and wide because we want to see the kicks and everything. We're going to go low and wide, and we'll double up the last action or two. Excuse me. We'll double up the last action or two and cut again and move the camera." When I came to Canada, the first thing I worked on was Ninja Turtles, the TV series. And at that time, I really didn't know much about how films were done here in the West. First day on set, I walked in and I looked around, and I only knew one guy there named Dean. There's like 15, 20 stunt people. I turned to Dean and I said, "Where's the camera? Where's the lighting guys?" He says, "Rehearsal." I said, "Okay, but where's the camera? Where's the lighting guys?" He goes, "This is rehearsal." And I would look at him funny. He says, "Strange," and he says, we're just rehearsing today. That's it." And I said, "The whole day rehearsing?" I couldn't believe it, because everything I did in Asia, you literally rehearsed 5 minutes before you shot it.
Mm.
Later on, they actually got, the next day we went to shoot. The first thing the director said, "We're going to shoot a master over here. We'll go in for some tight coverage, and we'll relight. We'll go over here and shoot another master." And I leaned over to Dean and go, "What's a master?" Because I never knew what a master was. We shot everything in little pieces.
Mm.
And the thing, and I think I might have already said it, but the thing that they do is we call it editing in the head. And sometimes that will look better. And if you've got someone in Asia, and I think I've acquired that ability, you'll be able to say, "All right, this piece is going to look good here, and I want to be maybe cowboy or tight or whatever. And then this piece will look better from this angle." Sometimes as a challenge for the lighting people. So what I've learned is to kind of work out my shots and say, "Okay, we're going to film from this side. When we do a switch and turn the lights around to the other side, I need these shots." But here, some of the bigger films will start to adopt that method, because of the influence of The Matrix and subsequently companies like 8711, John Wick, and so on. They've adopted kind of similar to the Hong Kong style, but even so, I'd say they've evolved into their own kind of style. But anyways, for me, because I'm trying to make commercial action films, um, I do try to apply a lot of what I learned. Think of it more in pieces. Think about which angle is going to look nice. There's some younger guys and I always try to watch what some of the newer people are doing. There's some younger guys that I've been watching locally recent times. I go, "Oh, that's some nice camera move," because they've learned to move camera while the action's happening, which in some ways enhances it rather than just kind of being maybe a simple pan, or maybe just locked on sticks or handheld. Sometimes the kind of Born Identity moving around. So with the other film, Ruthless Masters, we adopted that. So yeah, I do have things that I've carried over from Hong Kong, but I'm also, I guess, trying to stay kind of current with some of the trends, watching 8711, some of what the younger guys are doing, because the younger guys, they grew up with computers, right? I'm a little bit older vintage. I forced myself to learn computers. I forced myself to learn Adobe Premiere and that sort of thing. But a lot of the young guys are doing some cool stuff of their own. So I tend to watch that, but still kind of maintain some of the Hong Kong stuff.
Yeah. Good idea. I guess my version of that is just storyboarding the hell out of it. And I know a lot of you seem to see a lot of modern action films. It feels like some of the big Marvel films, they just give the sequence to the stunt team who actually even film it and hand it back and go, look, this is it. These are the best angles. And then they just recreate it in a huge studio with all the special effects, which I guess is nice to have that given to you. So what about say I am doing a micro budget film and I've got a couple of martial artists in it, but I've got an actor who isn't a martial artist, and I need to do a little fight scene with them. How do I make that as easy as possible? Any advice for dealing with people who aren't trained?
Yeah. Well, number one is see if you can at least spend a little bit of time preparing that. And depending on how things are set up, because sometimes DPs aren't always going to cooperate even with the director sometimes in terms of execution of action. So I would say, one, try to get some separate rehearsal time or prep time with those people, right? Rather than just kind of trying to wing it on the day. And I know sometimes when you're doing a micro, you're kind of constricted by budget, but hopefully those involved are also, like independent film people are, passionate about the project, hopefully. And then try to get some rehearsal time. I would also say if you shoot it in certain pieces, try to figure out the angles that can sell the fight, like make it look like it's actually happening, picking the right angles, coaching the actor or the people he's beating up, how to react and sell the hits. As sometimes the stunt people like to say, sell the hit, like the time and the reaction and acting and showing the pain. Work with them and try to get that done. And then I would say try to keep it as simple as possible. I took over a direction of an Indian movie. There was a big fallout between the producer, star, who financed it, and the director. And I got hired to take over. And I was working with a guy who, he wasn't usually a DP. He was usually kind of like an AC or something like that, assistant cameraman. But a lot of people will take smaller jobs to work their way up. But he was used to kind of shoot everything in a wide master, go in for some coverage. And I was like, my actor can't remember, right? He cannot remember 1, 2, 3, never mind 1 through 30, right?
Yeah.
You got a 30 move fight scene. I had, honestly, it was like arguing, and I was actually directing the whole thing. I'm still arguing with this DP. He's, I think a wide master. I mean, we're already lit. And I go, no, but you don't understand. He can't remember 30 moves. Let's do this in pieces. So I would say you need to try to find a way to collaborate with the DP, ideally. Sometimes stunt coordinators are good at directing. Some stunt coordinators aren't. It really depends on their experience. And if the filmmaker's got time, do some previs, some test shooting, right? Do a little previs or two, figure out the angles. Some DPs will look at that, then it'll just go out the window. But hopefully you can make your DP and or the director, whoever, stick to that kind of previs or storyboards, as you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. Good advice. So looking back on all of those amazing people you've worked with, like you say, Jackie Chan, I've looked at your IMDb, Sammo Hung, Stephen Chow, there's loads of names. There's probably names on there I don't even recognize, but I've seen the movies of. Who's your kind of like big martial arts superstar? Who's the top of the pile for you?
So like I said, in Hong Kong during that time, it was considered kind of the golden age of Hong Kong cinema. And I worked on a lot of films where I would say I'm basically a prop until the fight scene happens, and I just kind of stand in the background and it's okay, kill him. And then us Western guys, because we used a lot of Westerners at that time, would come in and do the fight. And usually, as long as you didn't hurt anybody, you'd come back and work. And it was a lot of us what actors here would call day call type work. So you get a couple days, you put a decent amount of money in your pocket, you survive a few weeks. Most of those films, I would never see anything in terms of the editing, anything, or nobody would talk to me about why they were picking angles. I mean, I would watch, but I'd just be okay, I've got to do this one, I got to do this one, I got to hit my mark, I've got to make sure I don't hurt the actor, right? When I went to work for Jackie, that film, Operation Condor, I don't know if you know anything about it, but it was the most expensive film of that time. It was like a 30 million US budget, which for Hong Kong films was unheard of. And we actually joked about that film because it took 9 months to get executed. And we joked, yeah, it's 9 months, you could have had a baby, right? But because we were the first Caucasians to work for him on that show from the first day, we did one scene. It's a hotel scene, and it's supposed to be Morocco, but it was actually the hillsides of Hong Kong. They built a set. He spent 1 month shooting one scene, right? And on camera, it's maybe 20 minutes, but they used to say they write Jackie a blank check, and Jackie just does Jackie. When I was working, there was myself and one other Caucasian named Ken playing kind of mercenary bad guys. I think he understood that we wanted to learn, and he was actually receptive. And in the beginning of the film, he was very relaxed. Towards the end of the film, he was looking at, I'm over budget, and he started to get anxious, and the production got bigger and things were swelling up. But because we're the first ones to work with him, I think he developed some confidence with us. So he just kept bringing us into all these scenes. In fact, some of the scenes I was like, I don't think he needs me here, but he brings us in. And then when we were filming the end of the film, they had an editing trailer. And he literally would say, hey, Bruce, Ken, I'm going to go edit. You want to come? And we're like, yeah, sure. And we would watch, and he had the old style reel to reel, and he would literally be there cutting film. And he would show us. And in fact, we had done one scene with him. And he basically said, you remember when I asked you to do this? I wanted to cut here because I know it's going to look better and I know it's going to cut seamlessly, right? And I learned a lot from that. So, we can talk because a lot of fans like to talk about, oh, Bruce Lee's the greatest and Jackie Chan's this and da-da-da-da. In terms of me as a filmmaker, that experience was probably the best. Because like I said, there are a lot of films like Stephen Chow. I worked with him on a film called Curry and Pepper. I'm just a con man that cons him and his buddy. It's a buddy cop film. I worked 3 days in total, right? I never talked to the director other than, sit here, do this. Okay, now I come here and I start fighting, right? In fact, those days I used to let the stunt coordinator shoot all the action, or the action director, we used to say. But Jackie, it was like I worked 65 days on that show, spread out over those 9 months. And anytime I was on set, if he was editing, he'd bring us in. Or there were certain cases when he wasn't under pressure where he'd literally talk to us and give us kind of like, well, this is why I did this. And I think this looks good because of this. So it was a really good learning experience. And like I said, when I returned to Canada, I picked someone to introduce me to Adobe Premiere. I just went, okay, that thing says cut. That's what Jackie would do when he cut, because I'm looking at the thing on the timeline. So I say, for me, not him judging him as a martial artist, but as someone that mentored me, that was probably my biggest thing and the best guy to me.
Nice. Wow, what a person to teach you how to edit.
Yeah.
So, what was I going to ask you? So looking back on that first feature and now your new one, Ruthless Bastards, what do you wish you'd known when you started shooting your first directorial feature?
Because I've been on a lot of sets, both in Hong Kong and also America. I worked on a film called iRobot, which was another one of these mega productions that I was probably there for 6 months. I was Will Smith's safety guy, and then I was part of the wire team. And I learned a lot from those. So when I went to make my first film, I wasn't like a brand new beginner because I do work with people from time to time, especially in the stunt coordinating area, where they've never done film. Like I worked one time with a comic book artist, and it was his first film, and he just lucked into it by meetings with people. Um, he was way out of his element. He was just way out of his league. So for me, I kind of knew what I wanted. I would sometimes bump heads with some of the people who had only learned and acquired their film stuff here in Canada. Like we improvised quite a bit. When I worked in Hong Kong, I never saw scripts. Like I did, like I said, about 30 films. I never once saw a script, right? Never saw contracts either, but that's a different story.
Mhm.
Anyways, when I did my own film, I kind of had some ideas of what would work. I would sometimes bump heads with the DP in a good way, in a collaborative way. One of my cats, sorry. Um, so I won't say I looked totally prepared because, there were certain things I didn't understand about lighting on the first film, going from wides to tights. And then that's when the DP would say nicely to me, it would be better if we lit for the wide and then we'll push in later for the tight rather than kind of, I want to do tight now. Can we do the wides? That was probably the biggest learning thing for me. Um, and I think the other thing was just understanding how everything integrates in terms of preparation work you do, the various departments. Because as a stunt guy, sometime actor in North America, I didn't really interact with them except if I went to do a wardrobe fitting,
Mm.
right? Oh, I do a wardrobe fitting. And I tell them, these legs will be kind of tight if I'm trying to throw kicks, but that'd be my interaction. I'd see the lighting guys, but I never really interacted with them, right? I never questioned the lighting setups, but once you start doing your own film, then suddenly you're aware of, oh, if I do change the camera, that's a lot of movement that's happening in the lighting side, and that's going to cost me 20, 30 minutes or more. So those are the things that I learned the most firsthand from my own experience. Um, in terms of like action stuff, I felt fairly prepared. Unfortunately, the people I worked with, they kind of listened to everything I said, and it was a very collaborative thing. Um, but yeah, I think just working with the different departments and understanding how it interconnects with everything else. Because again, most of my experience was stunts and acting.
Yeah. And then, so obviously you've got all that experience on set. What about sales and distribution and all that? So did you go into that with your eyes open, or how did you kind of figure all that stuff out?
Okay, so I heard a term when I lived in Asia because we almost did a film of our own in Hong Kong, myself and a fellow who was Jackie's first AD. In fact, the Jackie's company was maybe going to give us a little bit of money, not for reasons regarding myself, but it kind of fell apart. But one of the terms that I would hear tossed about was pre-sales, right? Like Jackie would finance his films based on a Japanese pre-sale because that was a big market for him, a Korean pre-sale, a Taiwan pre-sale, and they would kind of piece together some of their, I guess, financing or projections based on that. So when I came back to Canada, I've learned one thing. Most people who work in film have no idea how it's put together in the beginning stages in terms of financing, and no idea what happens to the film when they're picture wrapped. They don't really, now it's a little different with some of the younger guys, but they don't really understand the process of editing and post-production and final deliveries. In fact, final deliveries was another thing that just about killed me on Beyond Redemptions. I had no money, and I did most of the editing, not all of it, but most of the editing, and final deliveries just about killed me.
It's
So
endless, isn't it? It's
what's a chain
absolutely
of title?
endless.
Sorry?
Yeah. The list of I've done a video on deliverables, and it is just horrendous. When you've made a film, you don't realise there's about 30 or 40 things, pieces of paper,
Hmm.
files, all this stuff. You had
Yeah.
no idea that you should have been assembling right from the start, and it's horrendous. But I do think, to be fair, that list has decreased. I don't know if you've noticed that on Ruthless Bastards. Less stuff, or
Yeah. Some things are newer because now you've got the 2K deliveries or 4K deliveries and
Mm.
some of those things. But yeah, so uh, like I was saying, a lot of the film people here, they don't understand how it gets put together. They don't understand how it happens at the end. I had some idea of that, and I'm a big one for always trying to learn stuff, always trying to network. Um, so I took the time to figure it out, especially after Beyond Redemption. Um, Going into Ruthless Bastards, though, it became kind of a whole new thing because we're going to be having probably 50 times the budget of Beyond Redemption, actually probably more than 50 times. Um, but with that, we had a pre-sale. We were utilizing tax credits. We had some equity, but not a great deal. There were some strategies that you can do with what we call the reinvestments. And that was just a whole new universe. I mean, I knew of it. I was cognizant of it. But it was painful how many, and it's because we're also coming out of COVID at that time. And it was painful how many Zoom meetings I did. And then one of my partners in that, he's from Russia. He's a business accounting major, so he's good with numbers. So we just spent so much time going through the finance structure and then learning about cash flow and signing deals with agents, which was
That doesn't sound like a lot of fun. That's not having fights on camera, is it?
well,
That's
yeah.
yeah,
And I'm not just about the fighting stuff,
yeah.
but I think this is the one thing when you're a creative, if you really want to do it, and if you want to level up, which is kind of one of my personal policies, try to level up every time. You got to learn those things, right? Because ultimately, whether you're on a micro budget or a bigger budget, you're spending ideally not your own, but somebody else's money. You want to make sure you get it back, right? And by learning the the financing part and going into it and making sure you have a proper budget and seeing if you can mitigate the risk by maybe utilizing tax credits to fund some of that, or learning how pre-sales can actually happen, because then you can sometimes use that to help finance the film. You can do even better things as a filmmaker, and then also understanding how it's sold, because I've had so many people say, how do I get my film picked up? And I'm like, you should have figured that out before you made it. But now there's also, I find one thing is changing, and partly is what brought me to your channel. The Tubi universe is really changing things, and I'm got something that I'm trying. I think I sent you a poster. You didn't use it. That's okay. Luther Kane was a project we have, and it's specifically being built for Tubi, because I see it's a different business model, in terms of that. But yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the financing and learning it. And, unfortunately, to our distributor, after we did the first film, like I said, it was a good stepping stone. We didn't have too good a experience with the first distributor. I don't want to say too much negative stuff. We talked to this other distributor, and because they go to all the same film markets, knew about my film. One of the partners in the company that I signed with lives in Vancouver, so we got to see each other more frequently, and they liked what we had to offer. They liked that we're trying to do genre. They liked that I understood, even though Beyond Redemption didn't really have it. They liked the idea I understood utilizing bankable names. So yeah, I might have gone off track there a little bit.
That's all right. That's all right. It is all of that sales and distribution. You do have to go off track, unfortunately, don't you? Especially if you want to, like you say, level up. You've got to kind of get out of your lane and you've got to push things a little bit more. One thing I want to end with, and I don't know if you've got an example of this, Hong Kong days. Was it ever dangerous? Was it ever chaotic? Was it, choreographed perfectly? Were there any times when you were like, oh my God, this feels a bit risky?
Hong Kong has a reputation for that, and there are certainly accidents that can happen or had happened. I, for the most part, I had a couple things, a couple minor injuries, but nothing ever really super serious. And for the Westerners that went there, we were what you would categorize as fighters. And we weren't always being called upon to do some of the crazy falls that some of the Hong Kong guys would do. I did a few things, but nothing super crazy. One or two that were, the margin for error could have been bad, but fortunately it worked out, so I didn't get hurt too bad. Um, but I got to say one thing: the Hong Kong guys there, they have a really tight community, and I think many of the other Westerners and we chatted about this, and we always felt that the Hong Kong stunt guys were looking out for us more than anyone else in production. And Jackie, I count as a stunt guy, even though he's a star and an actor, because sometimes in production they'd be screwing you left, right, and center. Payments were a pain in the ass to get out of them. But the stunt guys always had our backs. And like I said, I never really had anything serious. I mean, I scratched my face really bad on one stunt gone wrong when I fell on sugar glass, but that healed. A couple bruised heels here and there. Did a few jumps from maybe higher than I should have if I was wiser. I was young, so stupid. But never anything broken. However, in Canada, I actually had more serious accidents, separated a collarbone. Not that big a deal in context what some people suffer, but I quite honestly think it was partly the fault of the team, because the way they put me in the wire is going, that just doesn't feel right. But you live and learn.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, one other thing I was going to ask you was, did you ever work with Chuck Norris? Have you ever done a film with him in? No.
I've been asked that question a couple times recently.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I get really upset if people ask if I worked with Bruce Lee, because I always say he died when I was 12.
Yeah, so I was going to say that's a bit more difficult.
Yeah, I met Chuck Norris very briefly at an Arnold Schwarzenegger event. It was like a fitness thing that he does, which I attended. And Chuck Norris was there. I got to shake his hand and chat with him, along with like Schwarzenegger and some of the other celebs that were there. Nice gentleman, was very friendly with us. Took some time to chat with us. So no, that's the limit of my interaction. I've been asked that a couple times in recent days.
I bet you have.